Okay, so today we're going to be learning about the distributive property and how to get variables by themselves, okay? So if you don't recap from your previous math classes, this is just going to be a little recap of how do we get x by itself. So let's say, for instance, we have a negative 8 plus x is equal to 2. What would we have to do in order to get x by itself? So we see that we have this number over here that's bothering us, right? In order to get x by itself, we should bring this number to the other side so we can get x by itself, right? So how do we do that? Well, we see this is a negative 8. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the opposite of that. What's the opposite of subtracting? Adding. So we're going to add an 8. And we're going to add an 8 on this side, because whatever you do on one side, you have to do on the other side. Essentially, this is going to cancel out, which is going to lead us to x is equal to 2 plus 8. What's 2 plus 8? 10. That's how we solve for x. Remember? Now we're switching it up. We're adding more operations. Now we have more steps and blah blah blah. Okay, so now what we're left with is this. What we had to do is we had to read our equations more carefully and see what steps we had to take. So we see right here that we have a negative 3 beside a parenthesis that has an 8 plus 3, right? So if you don't remember, whenever we have two numbers side by side each other, just like this with no operation in between, that's essentially going to tell us that we have to multiply. So when we look at this, we see that we have a negative 3 beside this parentheses, right? That's telling us that we have to multiply those two numbers, okay? And how do we do that, you may ask? But by using the distributive property. The distributive property is essentially we're just distributing this number into these other numbers and variables inside the actual parentheses. So when we distribute, we're essentially just multiplying. That's all we're doing. We're just multiplying. So now we can go ahead and start simplifying our equation, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to simplify this in order so we can get the variable by itself. So we're going to start off, okay? Negative 3 times a. That's going to give us negative 3a. If you're wondering why, because negative 3 times a, that's essentially negative 3 times 1a. We just don't put that 1 in front of the a because it's irrelevant and it's just too much. But if you ever need that, or you need help, or it confuses you, just always remember that whenever a variable is by itself, that means it's just equal to 1. It's a 1a. So you can always just go ahead and put your 1s in front of them, but you have to get used to like not seeing that. So yeah, so now we're just multiplying like we usually would. Negative 3 times 1a is negative 3a, because negative times a positive is going to give us a negative all the time. Now, moving forward, negative 3 times a positive 3, that's going to give us a negative 9. Positive 5 times a 3, that's going to give us positive 15. Positive 5 times a negative a, which is a 1a, that's going to give us negative 5a. Put that equal to 50, right? Now what we have to do, we're left with this equation, right? A little bit more simple, a little bit more easy to read. Now what we're going to do is we're going to combine like terms. When I mean combine like terms, I mean like combine the numbers that are pretty similar. You know, these two have variables in them, so we can like combine these two because they have the same variables. We can combine these two because they're whole numbers, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and combine those like terms. Negative 3a minus 5a. What does that give us? Negative 8a. Okay? Negative 5 plus 15. That's essentially 15 minus 9, which is going to give us positive 6. Now we simplified this, so we're going to put it equal to negative 50, right? Okay, so now if you look at this, we can see that it's kind of similar to this equation now, right? A little bit similar, a little bit, you know, similarities in here and there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to try and get this by itself, right? Because our goal is to get that a by itself. So to do that, we have to get rid of this number. And how do we do that? We have to bring it over to this side, right? Same concept, what we did over here. To get it by itself, we have to get it equal to 0. How do we do that? Well, if it's a positive, we're just going to do the opposite of it, which is subtract, right? So we're going to subtract 6 from each side. Remember, what we do on one side, we have to do on the other side, right? That's essentially going to cancel out, and we're left with negative 8a is equal to negative 56, because negative 50 minus 6 is negative 56, right? Now you're asking yourself, how do we get that a by itself? Well, remember what I told you over here? Whenever there's two terms side by side with no operation in between, that means that we're multiplying. So you see how this negative 8a is side by side? We're basically multiplying these two terms. Now what's the opposite of multiplying? Dividing. So in order to get a by itself, we have to divide this by a negative 8. And whatever we do on one side, we have to do on the other side, right? So now let's solve this. Negative 8a divided by negative 8. These 8's are going to cancel out, and we're going to be left with a, right? So now a is equal to negative 56 divided by negative 8. Remember, negative divided by a negative is going to give us a positive, so that's going to give us positive 7. And that's how you solve it. Now, moving forward, when we talk about this equation, right? We're going to do the same operations that we've done before, which is the distributive property, okay? So we're going to distribute these numbers into the parentheses, right? This is what we call the distribution of property of equations, right? Because we're distributing the numbers into one another. Next, we're going to multiply, right? So this is multiplication of properties of equations. 2 times 5 gives us 10. 2 times negative 3a, that's going to give us negative 6a. Moving forward, negative 4 times a is going to give us negative 4a. Negative 4 times positive 7 is going to give us negative 28. Put that equal to 92. We're left with a more simplified equation, right? Our next step is to combine like terms. I see I have a positive 10 right there, negative 28. Those are like terms. Negative 6a, negative 4a, those are like terms, okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to add those terms. That's considered addition of POE, properties of equations. So now we're going to do 10 minus 28. What's that going to give us? Negative 18. Negative 6a minus 4a, that's going to give us negative 10a. Put that equal to 92. Now we're stuck with this equation, which is again similar to this equation. So now we just had to do what we learned before. We're going to try and get that a by itself by adding an 18 on each side, since we have a negative right here, right? This essentially cancels out. We're left with negative 10a is equal to, what is that? 98 plus 18, that's going to give us a 0, 9, 10, 11. 110, right? So now what's our next step? We're trying to get this a by itself, and we have this negative 10 bothering us, right? They're essentially multiplying each other, so we're going to do the opposite in order to cancel that out, which is dividing. So we're going to divide that by negative 10, and negative 10 on each side. Whatever you do on one side, you have to do on the other side. This is going to essentially cancel out, and we're going to be left with a is equal to 110 divided by negative 10, which is going to give us negative 11, right? And that's how you solve for A.